Ruto has been mistaking throwing money at people as a solution. It's like firefighting with money. Don't write Ruto into such a big thing about how he relates with other countries.
He's the president.
No, he was being sweet-talked by Washington under Biden for just one important thing.
How is Africa going to deal with these juntas across West Africa?
Some of those juntas are bringing better governments than you have in your country. We have learned from the experience that the youth of this country can stand up. But I've also learned from experience that we have to link up with different people, start formations that go beyond serving any individual egos.
Abductions, both of Kenyans, human rights defenders.
I have been surprised about how many Kenyans have been saying that they like Trump's personal commitment to saving Kenya is the first step towards getting rid of the Ruto government.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Alpha House. Another beautiful day. We are so excited today because we have one of the most Kenyans who served in a very senior position, who's when he served his term as a minister, Kenya was on a very transformative journey. And it's such an honor to have a sitting with you, sir. Welcome aboard. I'm speaking about none other than Dr. Mukhisa Kituyi. How are you?
Hello, I'm fine.
Where have you been?
Well, I've been around the country, much of the time, out of the country, some of the time.
Are you back to external, international duties or
No,
personal?
not so much duties. I do a bit of consulting, but also a lot of advisory work for some governments and regional groups. Like tonight I'm flying out to Kigali for the 2024 African Trade and Development Conference, where I'm one of the keynote speakers. So I do this kind of thing once in a while. But then much of the time I also spend near Kitale doing farming.
Oh, when you retire, farming is the way to go.
Yeah, sometimes it takes you away from the pain of looking at Rutoism.
Wow, that was a very hard start. What do you mean by Rutoism?
The kind of massive coincidence of terrible evidence of bad governance in so many different sectors. At the same time, it's like multiple organ failure politically.
What do you think is causing what you're describing?
Are a number of things. First of all, for Kenyans, there is this problem that we take leave of our common sense when we're going towards an election. So common sense will dictate that you look at the character of a person you're going to vote for. And the run up to the last election, both President Kenyatta and a lot of persons who had worked with Ruto rang the bells about the character of the person you are looking at. But Kenyans were happy to be bribed by little money and sell their souls, and particularly with the influence of gullible religious leaders who could pocket some money and cheat that this was the choice of God.
Now that you mentioned the church, the Catholic Church for the last, say, 2 weeks has been on a roll on calling out the government for bad leadership and kept promises, and their words were actually perpetuating a culture of lies. Why is it that the church is speaking now and you're raising similar issues?
Look, historically, the church has been a very, very important partner in the struggle for national renewal. In the run-up to the so-called Second Liberation, our struggles in the early 90s, we had a lot of solidarity and partnership with most churches in the country. So what we're seeing in the church, in the Catholic Church, and even in some mainstream Protestant churches now, is not just newfound appetite for speaking the truth to power, but a rediscovery of the historical role. They had lost their way towards the last election. Too many of them succumbed into the lies that Ruto was peddling. But we're glad that some of them are saying it is too much to hide anymore. And they're just coming back to that historically important role.
And yesterday, in a press, the Nairobi Archbishop Anyolo Philip said that he returned, or rather the church returned the money that had been donated in some church in Kayole.
Yes.
What does that mean to the presidency and generally what the feeling is like with the public?
I don't know what it means to Ruto, but Ruto has been mistaking throwing money at people as a solution. It's like firefighting with money. That if you run around and you drop millions of shillings and you try to show that you're a generous man, people forget that this is not legitimately earned money. They'll just say you are a person with a good heart and then they will like you. But that after so many rising challenges in the country because of bad governance, because of uncontrolled appetites for stealing, The church is saying there is more to our mission in Kenya than being bribed by money. Money is not everything. And we can scale down the rate at which we're doing things to do it according to our capacity, roll out according to our ability, instead of selling our soul because somebody's sanitizing bad politics with throwing money at us.
How do we fix what you're calling as bad politics, which actually most of Kenyans have been calling out as, and that's why we even saw Gen Zs on the streets?
Okay, a number of things. First of all, as a nation, we should be outraged that we have brought ourselves to where we are. I mean, if you look at the level of intelligence of Kenyans, they deserve much better than we're offering them as political leaders. These funny cartoons that start masquerading, throwing around money that they think this is showing that they're leaders, are just a statement of political poverty. And the first thing to do is to say, are we capable of resisting short-term appetites for easy money? And think about the long term, the next generation, our descendants, posterity, our country, unlocking our talent by choosing leaders who are capable of leading. So the rain started beating us when we could ignore the signals that Ruto had an agenda to grab power without an agenda of what to do with that power. So once it's there, he's trying to invent it on the go. Today he's talking about joining BRICS, tomorrow he's talking about vaccinating all cows, the next day he's talking about all manner of things. It's just he's overwhelmed by the possibilities, and he's unfortunately endowed with a superhuman capacity for lying with a straight face.
Maybe is okay. Sometimes I look at it, I'm like, is it a desire to want to promise more and then have, because no one leader, I don't think the president works alone. Then have people maybe who do not work towards the goal of what he has desired? Or is it genuinely not having thought through how to lead a country?
I have never been a close friend to Ruto to know his mental process, but there is this phenomenon that he exudes with a sense of confidence that he is a know-it-all. You look at the way he appoints ministers who are crippled in their capacity to understand and comprehend the kind of appropriate the responsibility for the ministries, because he's the minister of everything. You know, until recently, well, most of the time, even up to now, most things have to be said about any minister are said by the president. Now, that's not the normal thing. When I was a minister in Kibaki's government, he gave me space and perimeters. He held you to account if you did not perform, but he allowed you to articulate the government position in consultation with cabinet and also the president, according to your portfolio. But Ruto is a minister for veterinary services, he's a minister for Stadia, he's a minister for BRICS application, and you start getting all these contradictions that he is a man, and kind of we've dumped power on him, and he absolutely has no idea about what to do with that power. He's just trying to invent government on the go.
Why would we be inventing a government on the go when we've been independent for 63? 2 years, is it?
61 years. There is a saying I always tell people, that he who has no destination cannot get lost. Or as Americans say, if you're not going anywhere in particular, any route can take you there. If we did not set out what agenda we wanted for the country, we had no proper marking scheme for who will be the candidate for that position. So that you look at the last election, what manifesto stood for did not matter about who becomes president. It's he who has the generosity to throw a lot of money around and to pretend that he's the face of change, run away with the show. So one of the main challenges right now is to say, can we start redefining where we want to go as a country before we start choosing who takes us there? It's critically important. The second that's critically important is this. If we have anything to learn from the changes of those of us who fought against the Moi autocracy, which was much poorer autocracy than Ruto's, you know that there is no generation which on its own can liberate a country. I can see a lot of people have been sitting back and say the Gen Zs can do it for us because the Gen Zs have been on the street. This is very naive. There has to be intergenerational solidarity. When we were the so-called young Turks, we reached out to the older politicians, Kenneth Matiba, Charles Rubia, Oginga Odinga, Masinde Muliro, and said, look, you are not yet done with your responsibility to the country. Can we fight together? Can we form a united front to roll back an invasion of our public space? And I think the time is ripe now that no generation pretends it is running its war. Part of the problem of the street action we have witnessed this year is that there was inadequate intergenerational engagement to say, okay, you are playing an important role. Your tools of social media are helping us online, in real time, get to know the lies, the plunder, the mistakes, and experiences that people are going through. But then there's another generation which has people say, okay, from our experience, the best way to reduce our vulnerabilities is to lock up our efforts, lock our steps, find people from different regions, change the conversation in a way that captures the imagination of as many people in as diverse a way as possible. This is the stage at which we have reached now.
At the moment.
At this moment.
And I keep wondering, we let millennials and Gen Z push it during that season when we had demonstrations. And we have people like you, we have the former President Uhuru Kenyatta, we have the former civil service Kinyua, and all this. We have senior counsel Martha Karua, and all people who we would consider as eminent Kenyans or persons for Kenya who've led through. Why is it that then these eminent persons are not playing a role in this, or they are quiet?
No, the street action happened as it should. That was very, very successful and very gallant. But we should not mistake an action for an agenda. The struggle against autocratic leadership is a long-term goal, it's a marathon. So the first out of the block are important, but others can now spruce up their act and say we have to join into this relay, play the role we can play, get it grounded that we're not going to look for overnight solutions, get it grounded that we have to raise the resources to cushion those who are vulnerable and victims of the brutal backlash from Ruto and the goons he hires. Start looking at those who have experienced linking us with international solidarity groups to popularize and strengthen our cause, to reach out to governments abroad and sanction a Ruto who pretends that you can be oppressive at home and sweet talk others when you get out of the country. So all these issues are on the table. The role of different people, it is not too late. Say, we have learned from the experience that the youth of this country can stand up. But I've also learned from experience that we have to link up with different people, start formations that go beyond serving any individual egos, that we have a singular purpose, build momentum, build capacity to liberate our country again.
So what is it maybe that you can pinpoint that your generation and these people that have been in public service and probably understand more than we do are doing to achieve that?
I don't think it's a generation. There are public leaders who are engaged in conversation. Unfortunately, at this stage, quite a bit of it is splintered. So, kind of pockets of consultation, different efforts of engaging with Gen Z, for example, and others engaging with each other. But eventually, I expect that over the coming 1 year, we should see a groundswell of people, not of uniform thinking, but complementary resourcefulness across generations, particularly many of them who have been into political office, and many who have been into civil society activity, many in the religious sector, and many into the professions, to start saying, okay, let us build this ground wheel of going in the same direction, the mechanics of how to convert this into not only a movement, but a political force can be dealt with as we go. Just this looking like a flying geese formation reduces the pain of the individual effort of the different groups. It's not a generational thing. It's a nationwide initiative that we have to do. So none of us will say, okay, we have now fixed it. But many of us are talking separately to many different persons, and we're engaging that.
And that's really encouraging to hear, because I think the whole idea of having pockets, and then you end up having a system where you can't have one agenda, becomes really hard to change a nation. Well, you worked with President Kibaki as a minister back then, and from the way Kenyans speak, that was one of the best governments where we achieved a lot. What is it that Kibaki was able to do that maybe President Uhuru Kenyatta has not been rated as best as Kibaki was, and President Ruto also has not been rated as good as Kibaki was?
Okay, a number of things set out Kibaki above the others. The first thing is the absence of vengeance towards those that he had defeated politically. When he formed government, at the very first cabinet meeting, Mwai Kibaki proposed to cabinet that the government donates the residence that Moi lived in Kibera, Cabernet Gardens, as a gift to Moi after he retired. That was a public house. Moi never grabbed that house. But Kibaki brought to cabinet a sense that we rise above pettiness and give a respectable, dignified retirement to a person who has been president. That's a major. Compare that with the act of Ruto's team raiding Uhuru's farm and stealing dopers. You see a 180-degree turn in mentality. You rise above pettiness by respecting the office and sending signals of respect to a former president, in spite of what he might have done to you or to the country. The second thing that we did under Kibaki, which was a genuine bottom-up economic decision, Moi and his cronies had bought KCC, the public milk company, at a throwaway price. Kibaki brought to cabinet and approved the government taking money out of the exchequer to pay Moi and his cronies to get back KCC as a public company. And that was the engine of the rehabilitation of the dairy sector in the country. So Uhuru
Interesting.
stifled KCC to grow Brookside. So the personal interest conflicted with the public interest in what he did with the dairy sector. So that's a major difference between Uhuru and Mwai Kibaki. There's a second one. Under Kibaki, dependence on foreign financing of our economic activity declined dramatically. By the time we left government, less than 5% of the public the budget of Kenya depended on donor money. That was a major statement of growing ability to rationalize the use of public resources, but to keep within reasonable range your ambition to spend according to the resources at your disposal. One of the worst things that Uhuru government did, and Ruto has done it even worse, is to go to the IMF and World Bank and say, we want to embark upon major infrastructure expansion in Kenya. We will be able to cover this expanded debt through enhanced tax collection. So they made a commitment which was dependent on factors they could not control. How much can you promise that you'll be able to ever tighten the belts in order to finance the largesse that they got into? That was the beginning of the trouble we are into today. What has happened under Ruto is to exacerbate the problem, that you are now normalizing massive debt to pay for recurrent expenditure. Now, to borrow money at interest, and particularly under Ruto, it is mostly commercial interest because it goes to the commercial markets. To borrow that money for recurrent expenditure means you are loading the next generation with a burden they cannot be able to sustain.
I'm not even sure it's the next generation.
Yes, that is one. But if you compound that with the level of pilferage, they define some semi-literate nitwit who is politically well-connected overnight can be donating 10 million shillings at Harambes, and he belches out the nonsense that they are doing the way little Sudi has been doing, in our face. The Greeks have a saying that those whom the gods have chosen to destroy, first they make mad.
Yes.
And we are seeing the signals from the gods.
Of who is mad, I don't know. I can't speak. But something else that stands out, President Kibaki was sworn in December 2002.
Yes.
And in January 2003, we had free education. How was that a success? And we've been struggling with funding for schools with the capitations, and also now the new university funding model that evidently has failed, and a committee has been set up to try and find out what is going on.
First of all, As government, giving priority to free primary education had to be a trade-off against other things. You could not start approaching multiple fronts of massive expenditure at the same time. We have to say, can we prioritize some areas with limited resources? Then we can go slow on certain other things once this has taken off. That's, to me, is basically responsible budgeting. What has happened under Ruto is a rapid fire in every direction. Every idea you grasp at it, and then you say, I want to run with this. Oh, I want to do this miracle here. I want to do the other one there. I want this study everywhere. And I'm going to increase what I gave to devolved government units and expand public health and not control the leakages, including offshore banking of public money. You know, these kind of things cannot go together. You cannot have even the ambition to sustain the minimum funding programs that you inherited when you are throwing money into other things that you have absolutely no rational justification for doing, like the so-called public housing initiative or the Hustler Fund, doing things that are bottomless pits into which you're throwing limited available public money without knowing how you're going to recoup it.
It would be interesting, since you've served as then it was cabinet minister, now it's a CS. If today you were put in cabinet, what would you do different? Because we can't maybe keep calling out the government, which is very okay, by the way, for things they're not doing. But if you're in that position, how different would you run it?
A proper minister has to be given the space to be minister. Under Ruto, a minister is a figurehead of his ministry. There's a small team of people around the presidency which decides and the minister rubber stamps. If proper ministers run their affairs, you could not have the minister, was it the Minister of Energy who was announcing
Adani.
Adani was a good deal in the morning, a due diligence had been done, and the president says later on, after consultation with our partners and seeing due diligence, we have decided. Which government was the minister speaking for? So you see, however good you are as an individual, if you are made to serve as a minister in a government that's run the way Ruto is running his government, your resourcefulness will not be sufficient to make an impact on government. So the fish rots from the head.
So we have, I think, 22 of them. You genuinely think none of them is doing their job independently?
I believe they are not given the space to do their job independently. And if anything, what we saw on the debacle of Adani is the best recent evidence. And I've talked to persons who have served under Ruto as ministers. They say sometimes you can sit with him, you present a program to him, he agrees with you, he goes home. The power boys come to talk to Ruto that night, and Kosgei rings you the next day to tell you instructions from the president, what you should do. The total opposite of what you agreed with the president.
Wow. I interviewed someone who served under Kibaki also, and he said that during that term, the grass at State House had started growing after a while of not growing because people never used to now go to State House to see Kibaki. Like, he put a wall to ensure there was no much interaction with the people, but rather letting you go do your job. And he also said you could go to a cabinet meeting and he would ask you, what is the problem or what do you want to fix in your ministry? And you present. And then he asks you, how many days or weeks can we expect you to do that? You say maybe 2 weeks. Then he tells you the next meeting we want with you is you presenting how far we've gone with that. Is that true?
That's very much true. Like, I was one of only 2 or 3 ministers in the Quebec government who kept the same ministry from start to the end.
5 years or the 10 years?
The 5 years, the first 5 years. Because there was a change after the vote on the constitutional amendment. Government was disbanded and reconstituted. And I think as one of 2 or so ministers who retained the same portfolio. And what I saw consistently is that it was cabinet government. The president genuinely brought his ideas through his ministers, relevant ministers, and there was genuine informed discussion. Any minister who had done background work could present their informed opinion about any of the issues, and decisions made in cabinet were kept. It was not like decrees from State House. Secondly, you could come to the president and say, I have a challenge here, and I think that an institution in the government is trying to interfere with what I'm doing. I can give you an example. I was minister in charge of Uchumi, and Uchumi was in ICU. And I went to cabinet and presented a case for government salvage solution to save Uchumi from going under. And cabinet approved and allocated me 600 million shillings. And my colleague, then the Minister for Finance, went to see the president and said, but Uchumi is partly a private company. Why is Kituyi putting public money into Uchumi? And I got to hear about this. I called the president and said, I request that I have an audience with you and the Minister of Finance. And he had Muthaura to call the Minister of Finance. I went to State House, said, you have given us separate responsibilities. If my colleague here had an issue about my cabinet memorandum, he should have rested in cabinet. Why is he coming to see you behind my back? And Kibaki said, yes, you came to talk to me. Why did you come to talk to me against what we had agreed in cabinet? That was Kibaki. You do not peddle falsehood that he second guesses what you're doing. If he disagrees with you, he will do it there. And a person who tries to create alternative focus or locus of power to change decisions that are collective is called out. That is extremely important for cabinet government. But when it is a one-man show, the rest of you are cheerleaders. You have a situation where you write large the weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and the arrogance of the one individual ahead of you.
Adani was cancelled. I mean, there was a public outcry for like 3 months, and there was no response. But anyway, eventually, after the U.S. Indictment of Gautam Adani, it was cancelled. What do you think is genuinely the reason for that forced project on Kenyans, that people could raise issues and all the complaints and were not listened, but it had to take the U.S. one day, even in fact hours, for it to be cancelled?
It's not that the U.S. showed Ruto that Adani was a thief. Ruto was in cahoots with these people about the stealing, plundering that was starting to happen under Adani. What happened is Washington ordered Ruto to cancel. It's not like they sweet-talked him into thinking that now we have seen your evidence. No, he was ordered to cancel.
He was ordered.
He was ordered to cancel.
Then how independent are we as a country?
You are not. You cannot be independent when you are kneeling, begging for some money to pay delayed public salaries, when you are about to default on even domestic debt. And your independence is theoretical. You are in a dark place financially.
Financially.
The worst place we've been since independence.
Worst.
And this gives us a vulnerability and gives others an inordinate influence upon us. If you see a situation where Kenya government is trying to borrow money from UAE, and IMF World Bank are saying you have no demonstrated capacity to pay pay back that money. You have plugged the loopholes through which you have wasted earlier money before you go for other money. This is not money from the World Bank. This is not money from IMF. This is not money from the US. It's money from UAE. But we have put ourselves into that vulnerability that somebody else can tell you, we can stop you from borrowing from other than ourselves because of your profligate ways.
Or how bad we are governed, or we govern ourselves maybe.
How much you have failed to govern.
Okay. With the new president in the US, who's a Republican, and of course Trump before has called African nations shithole countries,
Yeah.
and he actually doesn't show any interest in Africa or even Kenya per se. Where do you think the relationship between Ruto and Trump is going to be like?
First of all, don't write Ruto into such a big thing about how he relates with other countries.
He's the president.
No, he was being sweet-talked by Washington under Biden for just one important thing. With the turbulence in the Red Sea area, with the Houthis disrupting maritime trade in the East African region, Djibouti building military bases for everybody on asking, American forces in the Sahel being driven out by the new military rulers in that region. The geopolitics of this region was such that Kenya became an important surveillance point and oversight point for America's military interests in the Gulf of Aden region. It is not about Kenya. It's not about Kenya's importance anywhere. I was speaking at a public lecture at Nairobi University 2 weeks ago where somebody was talking about our strategic importance as a gateway to Africa. I said, what nonsense is this? Kenya's exports to the US in 2023, the latest figures we have, was 85 million US dollars under AGOA. South Africa exported $16.6 billion. Billion. So what prestige is Kenya talking about? As gateway to Africa, Dar es Salaam is overtaking Mombasa. The hinterland of Dar es Salaam now is extending to Burundi, Rwanda, and towards DRC Congo. Uganda has rerouted its pipeline through Tanzania because Kenyans wanted to do what they did to the SGR, buy the land where the pipeline was going to pass and build Githurai high-rises, then sell to the government so they get money out of the skies. So what's your hinterland? South Sudan? Our notions of an entryway, gateway, are as ill-advised as our notions that Lamu can be a major port when it has no hinterland.
Are you saying we just imagine that we are important in terms of relations with the US and generally geopolitics?
Let me go back to Trump. I have been surprised about how many Kenyans have been saying that they like Trump because he is against LGBT rights, because of his stand on morality. I think Trump is the most immoral president America has had since in all its years, of all the 47 presidents. And what he did is did a coalition of conservative Christians, racists who hate the color of your skin, extreme rightist groups who are really his soulmates, and people with a massive radical rewriting of America's agenda to go back before the Roosevelt years of the 1930s. And you're going to see the next 4 years going to be very dramatic. But having said that, what does it mean? America under Trump will have no time for Africa. Their only interest in Africa is that you keep your Africans at home. You saw what he said to Nigerians. I like the people of Nigeria. Many of you are very clever. You become very good professionals, but please take your professional training to Nigeria and serve your country. You are not going to see much attention given to Africa, let alone Kenya. Secondly, Trump is coming when AGOA, the African Growth Opportunity Act, is winding down in 2025. So the best that can happen is a limited extension with new conditions of duty-free, quota-free access to American market for products coming out of our EPZ zones. Otherwise, we're going to see a lot of shedding of jobs that have been sustained over the past 20 to 25 years around AGOA. Number three, America is going through a phase where 20 years ago, it supported globalization. Let people who are more efficient in labor relations produce things, and then we bring them to America while we produce the superior technology things. In the last 10 years, it went what they call nearshoring, that instead of importing parts from China and Southeast Asia, we start importing them from Mexico and Canada. And what you see, what Trump saying before he comes into office, 25% increase of tariffs on Canada and Mexico. It means that it's going beyond nearshoring. He wants production processes to be reshored inside the US. So a lot of jobs that are dependent on American markets, apart from things like coffee and so on, are going to be lost.
At least we still hold that.
What do we hold?
Coffee.
But we are not a major exporter of coffee to America. We export to Europe.
Unfortunately, but at least there's something. But I want to know, now that we were even given the NATO ally status.
Yeah, that means nothing, by the way.
Really?
Yeah. The only non-NATO ally status that makes sense is the special relationship between the US that the US has with Japan, South Korea, Australia, Egypt, and Israel. You see, America has written into its law that every year it gives $9 billion of military support to Israel. That's a special relationship. But you are told you are special friends because they want American forces to operate out of our region, and that their naval facilities, vessels, can come for a fresh restocking to Mombasa. What's your special
Basically, that's
relationship?
it.
That is it. Where is your special relationship?
How about all the bases they're putting up?
Where?
There's Lamu, there's, I think, Wajir.
But that's what I'm telling you. They are interested in your space as a place from which they can complement what they can do from the Gogasha Islands. Basically, surveillance in the Middle East. It has nothing to do with you.
But that surveillance does not add value to the nation in terms of
You tell me
income.
what it adds. Well, those women who bottle natural water can get a market. I know some friends who manage to sell a lot of water to also American soldiers in the Middle East. That can be market, that can be convincible. But just the notion that you are called a NATO special ally. I don't know if you read Sambene Osman's book called The Old Man and the Medal. An old man struggles to please the French, and he does sacrifices for a long time working for the French government. He's a Cameroonian old man. Now in old age, he's called on National Day to travel to Yaoundé to be given a medal of honor for recognition. He has to struggle to find and put on shoes which are pinching his toes, struggle to transport from the village because he's going to receive a medal. So even for you, this delusion that when you are called special NATO ally, you start becoming important, it is delusional to think that is a major thing. And it is going to mean nothing to a Trump who is even contemptuous about NATO itself.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So that you should understand. You know, so don't get carried away. But also, you know, there are so many contradictions in what Kenya does. I mentioned recently, when President Ruto visited Washington, the week he came back from Washington, he hosted the president of Iran.
Yes.
You totally wipe out the positive carryover from the trip from Washington by putting in their face the very next week you're hosting the president of Iran. Similarly, you are celebrating that America wants to negotiate a special trade arrangement with Kenya. And at the same time, Kenya is applying to join BRICS.
Actually, I was coming to that BRICS question. Do you now think we shall join BRICS? And actually, shall we be, if indeed what you're saying that Washington says you can't do this, then do you think his idea of application for BRICS is something that will be told you can't work with Russia or China, or because these are the members of BRICS?
BRICS was a party of a certain set of countries, the BRIC.
Yes.
Yeah? Brazil, India, Russia, and China.
South Africa.
And South Africa.
Yes.
And they represent a certain stage, although South Africa is dropping out of those ranks because it is deindustrializing. It's becoming a poorer country. But you know, they start gaining gravitas when they start opening up that other countries can join us. So you start having countries which are not emerging economies, countries which in fact are deindustrializing like Kenya, queuing up that they want to also to have the prestige that was sitting at the high table in something called BRICS. But you have to balance out what are you going to gain from BRICS by becoming a member, and how can you prosecute desire to join BRICS at the same time you're trying to develop personal, specialized relationship with Washington. When you go to BRICS to tell the Americans you can stuff your dollar, and at the same time you're begging America, please give us some more dollars and make us your good boys, special boys compared to others. You can't walk those paths at the same time. And those advising Ruto either do not know what this is meaning or are just proving that you can't listen to them.
President Trump sent a tweet just the other day, a few hours actually, and said that any country or the BRICS nations and the imagination of doing away with the dollar should just remain as a dream, because if they do, then he will make sure he puts tariffs and then they can't exist. So is this the beginning of an economic war, or is he even serious about it?
An economic war has been going on for a long time. Right now, America's Cold War is with China. And Chinese investment in the US, even in treasury bills, is so massive that they are not little boys to push over. China's holdings in American economy are so massive. America is growing taxes to pay China, service Chinese debt. but they're not talking about it sufficiently. All they're trying to do is to say, can we find methods of stemming the Chinese access to the top-notch technology so that we slow down the advantage they're starting to accelerate in by selectively punishing them in some areas. So that is the level of the Cold War. But those of us who have no muscle, no nothing, we're just looking at joining a ping pong game that we don't understand the rules and we're not among the players. We don't have a racket, we're not at the table. But today you are saying we want a special relationship with Washington, tomorrow we want to be members of BRICS. You are not going to get off the dollar in Kenya. Our entire debt outside the Eurobond is denominated in US dollars.
Which we have to clear if we ever joined BRICS. How do you think President Putin, President Xi Jinping, and all these others would respond to Trump with regards to that message?
Trump has a very, very unique thing. Trump is not a system player. Trump is not a player using established norms and rules. Trump is a transaction deal maker. That's what makes him so interesting to Putin. They have found a vibe that they can talk together, and many of us think that Putin plays him. You know, that in the very personalized way, Putin pushes and gets his way much easier with Trump than he could with another American president. But Xi Jinping is the main obsession of Trump administration. If you look at Department of State, Department of Defense, the Treasury, National Security Advisor, Trump is putting together a team of hawks that are rapidly hostile towards China. So we are going to see a ramping up of the rhetoric, anti-China rhetoric, and a lot of talk about additional tariffs and China's counter tariffs and very significant disruptions of a rules-based international trading system over the next 4 years. But at the end of the day, the two largest economies of the world are so mutually dependent that they are not going to divorce. So there will be rattlings of noises about tariffs and counter tariffs, measures and countermeasures, competition and brinkmanship. But the world is not going to war between China and the US.
That war is not coming.
That war is not coming. Russia will have a reprieve because Trump puts on softer gloves when he's dealing with Putin.
So he's not going to continue funding, rather.
I think he will continue because the DOD is going to be insistent about strategic interest to retain that solidarity with NATO, but he's not going to be an enthusiastic supporter of Ukraine the way the Biden government has been, and is going to try to push a deal. And I see a possibility that the president of Ukraine will step back a bit on his conditions, allow Russia to keep some of the land beyond Ukraine, beyond Crimea, as part of a deal for the war to end. Because even Putin knows that the best time to end that war has to be under Trump and not a backlash against Trump by another Democrat taking power in 4 years.
Interesting.
That's what I think.
Interesting. All these developments in terms of these geopolitics, how does that affect us as Africa?
Okay, number of things. Sometimes they say that when the elephants fight,
The grass.
the grass suffers. But my friend Mahmoud Mamdani used to say that when elephants make love, even the grass suffers worse. So sometimes peace between them is not a very good condition for us. Friction and market access problems for Russia made Russia start donating free fertilizer to developing countries, including Kenya. Fertilizers which Ruto started selling on as subsidized fertilizers, much of which was getting for free from Russia. I don't think we would have gotten those without the sanction regimes that followed the invasion of Ukraine. But the essential thing that I think is coming is the following. There is uncertainty about access to markets that are going to become protective because of the war games, the cold commercial war between China and the US. And what it means for many of us is that we have to start more seriously looking at growing the domestic market and building competitiveness to export into the African market.
And that
more than we've done before.
That building market, we I think 1.7 billion. But we've had a region where, the Sahel region, where the diplomatic governments have had an issue of how they relate, including our own president. How is Africa going to deal with these juntas across West Africa?
Some of those juntas are bringing better governments than you have in your country. They are not
Agreed.
elected.
That's true.
But if you look at some of them, we abhor military takeovers. But some of them, like the new boy in Mali, is doing a much better job than Ruto is doing. So he's democratically elected. But I think the main thing that we have to look at is this. As a country, Kenya, I negotiated the Customs Union of East Africa when I was Minister for Trade. At that time, Kenya was the largest exporter into Uganda and Tanzania. The balance of payment in the region was very, very much in our favor. Today, we are net importers. We import more from Tanzania than we export to Tanzania. Kenyan manufacturers are taking flight, relocating to Tanzania to export to Kenya. Some of the best users of export market, like the largest beneficiary of AGOA export from Kenya, is Bed Investments of Nakuru. But how have they built their capacity? Uganda has given them very good conditions for growing the textile industry. So they have grown cotton farms, they are spinning yarn in Uganda and using it for making the canvas to export clothes out of Kenya. Kenya has not given them the conditions that Uganda has given them. They are a Nakuru company, but they are creating jobs in Uganda more than they're creating in Kenya because of the conditions we create. We should start domesticating the talk about why is made in Kenya becoming so uncompetitive.
And you know, the most painful thing for me, this was for me, was during the EAC summit in Tanzania yesterday. The president praised Tanzania for overtaking us. That was painful for me to watch. I don't know how you felt about it, that we are happy. These are his words. He's very happy that Tanzania has overtaken Kenya. What is your take on that?
Well, first of all, I avoid that pain by never listening to what Ruto says.
Wow.
And that's partly why I moved to the farm much of the time. I spend looking at how people are struggling and engage people at the grassroots in a way that I haven't done for the past 20 years since I started easing out of Kenyan leadership. But I think it is sad when a person who celebrates defeat pretends to lead us. If you are a leader of Kenya, you'll say, what has made Tanzania overtake us? When Magufuli came into power, he asked these people, why are we in a situation where we must start importing milk from Kenya? Why we have to continue importing milk from Kenya? So this is the mentality. There's a developmental government. The developmental state is one where the leader of the state is singular about saying, why are we not performing better? Why are these small cases that came up yesterday overtaking us? What is it I can do to build a legacy that this country will do better than when I took it over? But when you get a person who celebrates defeat, who celebrates failure, who thinks he can make jokes, self-deprecation about his inability to even hold ground and is losing ground steadily, it is sad. Your solution is not about what you can do. Your solution is about how to get rid of him as your leader.
Before we get rid of him, he actually has, is it 2 years or two and a half left?
Well, at most, yeah.
Before that happens, then how do we go about it? Because we can't just sit and watch Tanzania, Uganda overtake us.
But you know, if you are not government, you cannot discipline the regime of production. You know, government has a lot to do with the cost of power. Government has a lot to do with the taxation of factors of production. When a government starts slapping a 35% duty on tiles, and tiles are a capital good, you are using them for construction industry. They encourage the construction industry. If you start piling more taxes on construction at a time when jobs are being shed in the economy, Nigerians will say your head not correct.
Wow. Okay, back home, we've seen a lot of political intolerance, and key scenario is we've seen what happened to former Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua in Limuru. Why is this happening at this moment when we're not even in an election season? Not that it's supposed to happen during that period, but
I have not consulted the people who paid the goons that did such a despicable thing. Earlier on in this conversation, I mentioned to you the humility and magnanimity of Kibaki when he made government donate a residence to a president who had also stolen quite a bit.
a lot, not a bit.
Yeah, more he stole.
Yeah.
But he did not steal the residence. And Kibaki sent a signal of respecting office of former president. A deputy president, in spite of whatever he has done, is a senior citizen, is a custodian of a historical prestige that you have been deputy president. That's why former vice presidents, former deputy prime ministers are given state security and transport and a substantial pension. But if you get into a situation where you don't agree with people who have been in senior positions, you let goons humiliate them. You did it to Kenyatta's farm and family. You did to remove security of Mamangina. You now start sending goons to humiliate Gachagua. Gachagua is not a good person. Gachagua was an extremely reckless stealing person. But he deserves certain respect as a former deputy leader of the country. That office should give him a certain level of protection by those who care about institutions. But it is not coming from these people.
It's not coming.
No, it's not coming from a people who are just moving with open mouths and open brains on everything, from one thing to the other. If we inflict pain on those we don't like, we feel good that, oh, they were embarrassed. But that's a childish mentality.
Really unfortunate that it's happening as we watch. And something else that has been happening, and people have been talking about it, is the abductions, both of Kenyans, human rights defenders, and worse still, it happened to a senior government official from, not government, like senior citizen of Uganda.
Senior politician.
Politician, yes.
A premier opponent of Museveni.
Yes.
Let me say this. When the Moi government abducted Öcalan, the leader of the Kurdish liberation forces from Nairobi, and gave him to the president of Turkey, I was very, very pained. I remember being in London, and for some reason I was going to the Kenyan High Commission in London. And the area was paralyzed with riot police because Turkish immigrants and human rights activists were trying to overrun the Kenyan High Commission in London because of Kenya's betrayal by handing Öcalan to Erdogan's government in Turkey. We did not show enough outrage at such a terrible action. Our prestige as a nation is supposed to be that we're a haven of peace. Those who come to us, we give them human dignity, we give them protection. If we don't want you to live here, we can ask you to find refuge elsewhere. But for Kenya to abduct allow the abduction of a senior politician from a friendly neighboring country, even if that makes Museveni happy, you have hurt Kenya, and in the long term, you have hurt the sense of empathy with Uganda. Museveni is a friend of Kenya. Besigye is a friend of Kenya. They may have their disagreements. There are due processes to follow if Besigye has committed a crime in Uganda. You take him to Kenyan courts. You don't abduct him and send him abroad. What was done was primitive, irresponsible, and hurtful to Kenya. And about domestic abductions, this president promised Kenyans that disappearances will disappear when he came to power. We didn't know that he was meaning it in the opposite. He has mainstreamed abductions. The abduction of Rai, because Rai was challenging the award of Mumia Sugar Factory to his younger brother, who was a business partner of Ruto. It's such an abuse of office and was such a bad precedent. It was testing waters that anybody, regardless of who you are, we can abduct you na mutadu.
I think that's when we were told mambo ni matatu.
Yes, and you made jokes about it as if it was a joking matter. It was very hurtful, and it sent extremely wrong messages to the business community. I see a lot of members of the Asian business community in Kenya who are citizens of Kenya who say, if you disagree with me, you will export me to where? I am born here, my grandfather was born here. What gives you the authority to annul my citizenship? There is no law in Kenya which allows the behavior that Ruto displayed on the Joshua Rai case. Similarly, this abduction of activists, Boniface Mwangi is abducted. The next day, when people raise the voices, he's taken to court. Why are you detaining people at night? Why are you going to people's homes at night and then eventually taking them to court? Why don't you send them summons to come to court? Why is this a popular thing, this resurgence of primitive village dictator mentality in the management of public security affairs? We have a responsibility to raise our voices that this criminal conduct is not acceptable in a civilized society.
Not acceptable, that I stand with, because today it's Mukhisa Kituyi, tomorrow it could be me, the next day it's someone else for just speaking out. What does it mean about our foreign policy and basically our diplomatic relations, not just with Uganda, because we've even, it was done to some Turkish guys who were deported back. Generally, our diplomacy, how is it now at this point?
You know, we have not been very smart in our diplomacy over the past few years. I can give you an example. At a time when Kenya is presenting a candidate who would otherwise be a very credible candidate to be the chair of the Africa Union Commission, the president of Kenya becomes the first and only African leader who, out of nowhere, starts expressing solidarity with Israel in its genocidal invasion of Gaza. In his warped mind, he thinks that shows that he's a supporter of the land where Jesus was born. But to a lot of other people, he just shows that he does not know what he's talking about.
Okay, the example you gave is a bit off.
Yeah, but I cannot see any reasoning beyond that. How can Kenya come up and say, oh, Israel is right to go into Gaza? What forced you to such an irresponsible statement? And when you are feeling Raila for Africa Union, do you know that you have 19 majority Muslim countries in the African Union who are each having a vote for who's going to become chairman of Africa Union? You know, so there isn't sufficient connection between the cause and the consequence.
So basically,
you go to Nyanza and you say, we are campaigning for Raila.
What he speaks needs to be, what especially people in leadership speak, they need to think through the impact, not just in Kenya.
There's a lot of professional officers in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Kenya. I like that office, that ministry has had a long tradition of properly training at its training institutions, in-house training, interning program of very good professional diplomats. And they are aware of the exigencies of office. They know about the importance of the word of the president. They know about the implications of what a president says. But the fact that with such a human resource at your disposal, you make such expensive gaffes means you don't listen to informed opinion. You listen to your, like kitchen cabinet, the ones who tell you now, this one, we embarrass him today. And those ones who think that they know better than us, we now are having a new partners and we'll show them a lesson. Those are the ones who feed your mentality.
By the way, now that we are fronting Raila Odinga for this seat, the campaign was very huge during Amina Mohamed's time when she was trying to go for the same seat. Do you feel we've done enough to have Raila get that seat?
I don't know if it's campaigning that gets you that seat. There are certain things that are strategically very important in consideration. The gaffe on the Israeli genocide in Gaza is just one of them. But there's also something you have to understand. I have worked at the highest level in international diplomacy as an Undersecretary General of the United Nations. I've sat in fora where major election and appointment decisions are made. One of the things that I know for sure, Francophone Africa will always vote as a bloc on any issues concerning Africa. If you have two candidates for a position representing Africa, and one is Francophone and another is not Francophone, the Francophone candidate starts with the 29 votes of the Francophone countries in Africa.
Where? That's
So
where we are at
when
the
you have a
moment.
Djibouti candidate and you have a Kenya candidate, know that the Djibouti candidate starts with the 29 votes of Muslim Africa.
Hey, Baba.
And if you add them, then among the 19 Muslim majority countries, those which are not Francophone, you add those ones on the Francophone countries. And then you get to a situation where the president of South Africa, who is not Francophone, but is the voice and leader of SADC, issues a statement that SADC is supporting the candidate of Djibouti. You have to start saying, where are we going to campaign? Where should we go to campaign for Raila?
We start with EAC. Wow, that's a very harsh truth. And anyway, Raila Odinga, we still wish you the very best on that run. But what Dr. Mukhisa is speaking is, he's someone who sat at levels I have not been, so I can't say much. That's it from me.
But anyway, I respect what Raila has done for this country. He has made sacrifices a lot of others were not ready to make. He has suffered pain for national renewal when others were not ready to do it.
Wow.
I've known this intimately. I hid him in my house when Moi was trying to arrest him. I disguised him and tried to smuggle him into the American embassy, and they refused to take him in. And we had to work to ship him out through Uganda. And luckily, Uganda at the time did not behave the way Kenya has behaved towards Uganda. They would have arrested him and brought him back to Moi. And that's when he went to know, and he has made his contribution. Regardless of how this ends, it cannot erase the historical important role he has played.
True.
But now the rest of us have to say, we need to rally together in defeating the forces of reaction and regression in the absence of Raila from our ranks.
That makes a lot of sense. Wow. Maybe we should invite you more so you can share more secrets of what you've been doing along these years as a government or a servant of Kenyans. Something else that President Ruto has been big on, and I think now the Minister of Labor, is export of Kenyan labor to send to the UAE, to, I don't know, Gulf region, to wherever, Germany. How is that sitting with you?
You know, there are a number of things. First of all, what we call Category C, Category 3, same-skilled labor movement around the world has been a phenomenon going on long before Ruto came along. Kenyans going to look for jobs in the Middle East is not starting today.
Yes.
Kenyan nurses and paramedical personnel going to work in Britain is not starting under Ruto. Even in the US, healthcare providers from Kenya are a very sizable number. But what government should do is two things. One, through bilateral and multilateral engagement, try to improve the working and living conditions of Kenyans in these same-skilled and lower-skilled category exports. There's a lot of abuse of Kenyans in the Middle East. There's a lot of young women who come back victims of forced organ harvests. I buried a girl who did not have a kidney, and she was sent back from her employer. Government should look like what Philippines has done. That a commitment, bilateral commitment, you do not detain the visas, the passports of our citizens when they come into your country. And two, our citizens have unhindered access to our missions in your country. These living condition concerns are the priority area government should go in, not pretend that now it is taking over the work of the recruitment agencies of semi-skilled labor going abroad. Secondly, the critical responsibility of a government is not organizing its citizens to be exported. It's about developing and retaining domestic skills for growing the national economy. What Ruto should be doing is say, how can I make Kenya attractive for Kenyan professionals to contribute to value creation in Kenya? Not how can I make it easy for Kenyans who should otherwise be building Kenya to go and build Germany.
Well said. And as we conclude, what would be your final message to Kenyans who are watching this and are probably at a point where they have mixed feelings of how things are generally?
Luckily, I don't think that Kenyans have mixed feelings. Majority of Kenyans are outraged at what's happening in our country. And to fellow citizens, I want to tell you this. I was a relatively young man just back in this country after finishing my PhD in Norway with a young family, 2 young sons. When I quit gainful employment to be totally dependent on a modest salary of my wife, who was then an ICU doctor at Nairobi Hospital, in order to dedicate myself to saving my country from the Moi regime. We made sacrifices, we learned patience, we absorbed pain, but we believed in a larger goal than ourselves. Today, 24 years later, we are faced with the same stark reality that our nation is in pain. Our future and present are already uncertain. A lot of people hurting. A lot of sick people have no access to medicine. I keep explaining to everybody, democracy is founded on a promise of hope that next year I'll have a better Christmas than last year, that my children will live a better life than me. But when you go through a period where you are realizing that today's adults are going to end life poorer than their fathers, and their children are going to be poorer than themselves, that many young persons have come of age but they cannot leave home because they are back to depending on food from their mother. The very foundation of democracy as a hopeful ideology is under threat. You have to save Kenyan democracy. As a nation, we have to be ready to join in. Make your sacrifices now. Don't point to others to do it for you. Ask yourself, what can I do to contribute to this? That personal commitment to saving Kenya is the first step towards getting rid of the Ruto government.
Great. And I've just remembered one thing that I feel you should address, the IEBC reconstitution. That has not happened, and time is ticking.
That's a mechanical phenomenon. I think when there's an overbearing of government and parties in government in a country, and you rush the reconstituting of IEBC, they have too much muscle and they will dominate who sits on the IEBC, which compromises the next election. I think much as IEBC is important to be reconstituted, let us reconstitute the alternative forces so that they can find voice in creating a more balanced IEBC than one created by Ruto and Raila right now.
Join our forces as we go reconstitute our forces.
Yes.
Great. That's a great to end it. It's been such an insightful episode talking to you. I think I've learned so much, especially of governance and how to run a country and what diplomacy is and is not, and the impact of every word that we say, especially if you're in that position where it influences across the globe. So thank you so much for coming through. I hope for you who sat there and watched this episode, you enjoyed yourself, learned something, and we'll work towards making Kenya great and better for everyone. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. We will see you on the next episodes.
And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.